Einen schönen guten Morgen allerseits. Mein Name ist Maribel Königer. Ich leite bei der Erste Stiftung das Programm für Journalismus und Medien und darf Sie heute zu unserer Matinee begrüßen. Und da die Veranstaltung in Englisch stattfindet, werde ich jetzt die Sprache wechseln. It is my great pleasure to welcome you today on behalf of the four partners of this series of debates, Debating Europe, Europa im Diskurs, which are the Institute for Human Sciences, das Burgtheater, the Daily Der Standard, and the Erste Foundation. What do the tech bros really want? I admit the temptation was big to turn the title of our event into a prompt to find out what ChatGPT, Copilot, Perplexity, and the like would consider the most probable outcome that we might like to read, because this is what large language models are about, or that the tech bros like us to read. But with an introduction like that, you won't win a prize for originality anymore. So instead, I would like to use the opportunity and the stage to congratulate someone for a birthday. Maybe you guess who that might be. Wikipedia turned 25 this week. So this promise, Wikipedia's promise, still holds true today to make the world's knowledge available to everyone and contributed by everyone. It's a very clear mission. There's no hidden agenda. And this seems to be rare these days, doesn't it? And if not naive, how sad is that? So what do the tech bros really want? We made here some guesses, you can read them. I personally miss eternal life on Mars, of course. But the good news is that whatever they want, until now apparently, they could not kill our wish to come together and listen to real experts. And we have great experts today. Please join me in welcoming Misha Glenny, our moderator of today's discussion, who will introduce to you the experts in a moment. Enjoy the morning. Thank you.
Hello and welcome. It's a great pleasure to be here today for what I think is a very important debate. And in fact, in some respects, I think we can say with confidence that this is probably the most important issue facing us at the moment. And yet it's one which gets relatively little publicity and public debate, as I think you'll find out, because you're going to learn, I suspect, quite a lot of things that you may not have known before. Let me introduce the fabulous guests that we have this morning, but I'm going to start with a little introduction to remind you that it's almost 20 years ago since Steve Jobs unveiled the iPhone, a moment which has changed the world as the power of the personal computer migrated from our desktops to our pockets. And since then, we've been living in a world dominated by apps, by social media, and the digitalization of, well, almost everything. But our mobile phones are merely a facade behind which lie vast empires of capital and power. Jobs' Apple, Zuckerberg's Meta, Ellison's Oracle, Thiel's PayPal and Palantir, Google's Brin and Page, Gates's Microsoft, Musk's Tesla, X and SpaceX, to name but a few of the most prominent. As Silicon Valley emerged in the 1990s as the center of this new industry based on internet technologies, many of these individuals and their startups enjoyed warm relations with Democratic Party politicians, notably the two presidents, Clinton and Obama. But in recent years, that has changed. Donald Trump's second inauguration as president last year was striking above all because the tech bros, as they are now called, were afforded the most prominent positions at the event, signaling an ever deeper relationship between them and Trump's Republicans. So in exchange for the money and the support they give him, what are they looking for in return? And that is the heart of our discussion today. Well, to try and understand exactly that and what the implications of their ambition are for the rest of the world and Europe in particular, we have gathered a stellar lineup for you today. And I'm glad to say that this group of people who collectively know more about the politics of the digital world than almost anyone else in Europe are all women. And that is not a coincidence. On my far left, we have Helga Novotny, an internationally renowned scientist whose achievements are too numerous to mention. Suffice to say, she is emeritus professor at the ETH in Zurich, that's Switzerland's leading technical university, and a founding member and later president of the European Research Council. She's currently the chair of the Scientific Advisory Board of Vienna's Complexity Science Hub, and as a member of FORWET, the Austrian Council for Sciences, Technology and Innovation, an influential advisor to the Austrian government, and her new book is about to come out. Remind me of the title, Helga.
Zukunft braucht Weisheit.
Future needs, was war die?
Weisheit, wisdom.
Wisdom. Future needs wisdom. Yeah. Certainly does. I'm not sure if we've got enough of that, but we'll see in the next hour and a half. Next to Helga is Biban Kidron, who enjoyed a successful career as a documentary and feature film director before devoting herself almost full-time to politics after being appointed a life peer to the House of Lords in 2012. Baroness Kidron has made a name for herself as an advocate for children and young people's rights, and more recently has been a key figure in ensuring the promulgation of the Online Safety Act, which aims to regulate digital services in the United Kingdom. Then to my immediate right, we have Francesca Bria, who describes herself as working at the intersection of technology, geopolitics, economics, and society. She is an honorary professor at the Institute for Innovation and Public Purpose at the University College London, and currently a senior fellow at the Stiftung Mercator in Berlin, where she leads the Eurostack initiative on Europe's digital sovereignty, and I hope that's something we'll be coming to later on. She served as president of the Italian National Innovation Fund and was a board member of RAI, Italy's public broadcaster. Francesca has worked as an advisor both to the United Nations and the European Commission. Last, but by no means least, to my far right is Marietje Schaake. Marietje is a former MEP for the D66 party in the Netherlands. She is not, by the way, as states there, currently a politician. And because of the fact that D66 is forming a government in the Netherlands, it's quite important to note that she is not speaking for D66 or the Dutch government. She has been called the most wired politician in Europe. Marietje has been International Director of Policy at Stanford Cyber Policy Center, among many other positions, and is a regular columnist for the Financial Times. Perhaps most importantly for our debate, she is the author of the best-selling The Tech Coup, How to Save Democracy from Silicon Valley. And the good news is there an updated version now just published, available in German, Silicon Valley Attacks, Wie Tech-Giganten unsere Demokratie zerstört. So, before we get to the substance about the political aims of the tech bros, I want to turn first of all to Baroness Kidron, who's in the middle of very complex political negotiations about digital issues in the United Kingdom. But let's start with Elon Musk's about turn this week. Having refused to contemplate withdrawing his AI tool, Grok's ability to nudify, and please excuse the ugly neologism, to nudify images of people, primarily females, he backed down when British Prime Minister Keir Starmer threatened to shut down X. formerly Twitter. Is this a victory for democratic values? And if so, why, Biban?
So, sadly, I don't think it is a victory for democratic values, because I think before the UK actually made its move, both Malaysia and Indonesia blocked X immediately. Yeah, they didn't wait for the discussion, they didn't wait for the push, and they didn't wait for the public outcry. They just went. So I'm afraid we were followers and not leaders on this. But I do think it was an important moment, because I think that one of the things that may unite all the voices in this panel is to feel that we feel that there is a progressive relationship to tech. We do feel that there's a sovereign relationship to tech, and it's not the tech, but it's the structure of ownership of tech that is at the heart of the problem. And so what was important was it was a very public display of saying to a tech bro, no, not on our watch. So I would say it is a victory for public outrage, because there is no positive use case for nudifying a woman or a child against their will. No positive use case. And so suddenly, visibly, to everybody, without any understanding of tech policy or how the technology works, they just go, no, this is wrong. And I think that that's very, very important. We have to really, really use these moments to make this a public concern, a really understood public concern. Because in your introduction, you say, part of the problem is it's not a doorstep issue, yeah? So one of the answers is to indeed make it a doorstep issue. And I think Elon Musk, thank you very much, he made it a doorstep issue.
And he backed down. That's the really interesting thing.
Exactly, this is my point. It's that there has to be a line, but we have to be prepared to draw a line. And that was one of those few moments. And I have actually been witness to, and thankfully, some of the legislation I've passed in the UK has actually drawn all sorts of lines, a lot more than people are aware of. But I think this is really important. We can make a difference.
Maritia, let me come to you next. I've mentioned the concentration of capital and power invested in the big tech companies. So can you outline for us who are the most politically engaged of the major players, and what are they hoping to achieve?
Yeah, it's a small question, a good start. No, I think it's really important to sort of dig deeper beyond what we can all see, because we all have examples of, now it's nudity, it was disinformation and foreign interference in elections, there's fraud, most reviews on consumer goods are fake. There are all kinds of layers of problems, addiction among young people, et cetera, et cetera. But the question is indeed, what are the people behind these companies and what do they want? So at one point, Elon Musk bought Twitter. And I was living in Silicon Valley at the time, and there were quite a few people who were sort of laughing that Elon Musk had done a really bad deal. They were like, oh, well, he must have been too high on something. He probably didn't understand that there was very little perspective of serious profits coming off of Twitter. And so there were actually quite a few people who were quietly ridiculing him. But if you look at it through the lens of an economic deal, that would indeed be a bad deal. But if you look at it through the lens of acquiring power, it was a spectacular deal. And so I think we have to be very careful not to just look at the visible harms, however bad they might be, not just to look at excessive market power, however excessive that might be, but to really understand the depths of the power of some of these technologies and the platforms that operate them and the people behind them. And so Musk is an obvious person because he combines a whole bunch of companies and has so much wealth that even the highest fines, such as the ones that the European Union imposes in violation of the Digital Services Act, for example, which is a percentage of what company revenue amounts to, are spectacular numbers of money, but they don't hurt the richest person in the world. And so I think we need to understand the power dynamics, and so I think the corporate leaders like Elon Musk, but also investor Mark Andreessen or Peter Thiel that you've probably heard about. They probably also have a spectrum of ambitions. They're happy to have little regulation and a lot of agency for their companies, because of course it's nice to make money. But then, on top of that, they're interested in discrediting the legitimacy of legislation at all. So the attacks that you see on the EU's role as a tech regulator are not so much about one specific article in one specific law that one specific company may not appreciate. It's about the idea that democratic countries come together and actually take such a position to say we demand transparency of tech platforms. That is the sort of Achilles heel for the companies. Again, not from an economic perspective, but from an oversight perspective that would reveal the power of the algorithms, the impact on our democracies, and the choices that they can make to steer elections one way or another, or to steer public debate, social outcry, polarization, and what have you. So, you know, all the tech moguls, and not to forget the crypto moguls that are supporting the Trump administration, have their own power ambitions that don't stop at the borders of the United States, and that are anywhere between optimizing for corporate room to creating parallel states that are not governed by the rule of law, but that are governed by a CEO king kind of person. You know, they're testing this in city contexts. Some of them are buying up large swaths of land. These ambitions are not just about lobbying for one company or another, lobbying for more profits or one regulation or another. They're really about a new kind of society that is undemocratic.
So, Marietje, you're arguing that this is a potential civilizational break in terms of our structures and the assumptions on which we built a free society. Is that right?
Yes. So I again think Elon Musk helps us to illustrate all of this quite well. You know, this so-called Department of Government Efficiency that Donald Trump appointed him to lead, which was not an official government department, despite the name, which meant that there was not an official congressional hearing, and which also meant that there was not a distance between his corporate interests and a public role, which is normal if you're actually heading a department. But when you looked at the activities of this DOGE department, they were not reforming the government at all. It looked much more like, one, destroying some key governmental functions, and two, like gaining critical data access in a way that few corporations have ever been able to achieve. And so while few people would disagree that governments should be more efficient, I mean, it's a pretty popular point if it was actually about reform and efficiency, what was actually going on was something completely different. And if you look at it from the idea of creating this parallel structure, dismantling the rule of law, dismantling checks and balances, dismantling oversight over critical contracts and sectors, then the activities of DOGE made a lot of sense, because the destruction is the purpose. Even if it's called efficiency. And so, you know, what I worry about most is that we all fragment our attention about the many harms that we're seeing of the role technology plays, but we're not digging deep enough in the public debates, in the political sphere, about what is actually at stake. And of course, our massive dependence in Europe on American tech, particularly with the dramatic changes we've seen in the transatlantic relation, put us in an incredibly vulnerable spot that make it very urgent that this is a top priority for European politicians, but not a top priority of tweaking one regulation or the other, which is still the name of the game in Brussels, where because we focused on regulation for so long, it almost risks becoming a trap, because what it is we need to do is to de-risk our dependence and build sovereign alternatives, because the regulation is almost never going to be effective enough to address these core power issues and the dependencies that we have that are weaponized.
Thanks very much, Marietje, because that takes me on to what I want to ask Helga Novotny about first of all, which is Why has Europe failed to create influential tech companies that can compete with Silicon Valley and China at the highest level? Because we know that we have the educational infrastructure to do it. We know we have the talent to do it. Why haven't we done it?
Yeah, I agree with what was said. We need to dig deeper. And to answer your question, we have first of all to realize what is the basis of the power and the threats that we are now witnessing, and it's the technology. So we have to get to familiarize ourselves with what is so special about this technology and what makes it such a potent weapon. Now, it all started with the development of artificial intelligence already in the last century, etc. And as Misha rightly says, it's not that Europe lacks talent. And I personally am involved in a very small research project that looks at what were the European contributions to the development of AI and the roads not taken for various reasons. And we are worried that there is also a lack of what we call epistemic diversity, different directions that this AI models and further developments can take. So it's not lack of scientific, nor is it lack of industrial cloud. And the Eurostack that has already been mentioned, and Francesca can tell you much more about it. It's an initiative by European digital companies to come together and to say we can provide services that European customers need, not what, to notify and so on, but really cater and respond to the needs of Europeans. But, however, this is not enough. There are also initiatives at European scale. So what is the cause? And I would say every member state, and we have 27 in the European Union, since Britain left us, unfortunately, these 27 member states all have a strong political mandate, and it's called digital sovereignty. But instead of interpreting this as European digital sovereignty, each country speaks about its own national digital sovereignty. So just let me take you on a brief journey. Imagine you are a well-positioned, very competent European firm. You need capital in order to grow. Where do you go? You go to your national bank. You go to a Dutch bank, to an Italian bank, you go to an Austrian bank, and you don't get very far because the bank, is limited in terms of capital it has. Then let's suppose you got funding. Then you look for a market, and first you say, well, with all this defense talk, etc., and so on, I look for public procurement. And what do you find? You find different rules, again, in the Netherlands, in Italy, in Austria, in France, in Slovakia, etc. So this only takes you so far. Then you start to look for, it gets even weirder if you have something that is classified as dual use. Because then you get into a labyrinth, how to define dual use, and you end up with 27 different interpretations.
So you mean usage for civilian and
for civilian and military. Then you turn towards the private market. You are up to 27 different taxation systems, 27 different employment systems. So it's a very difficult world to maneuver. You meet barriers. There are ways of getting around, and Europeans are not stupid. So they invented one concept which is called the 28th member state. What is the 28th member state? It's a construct. And you say, let's suppose there are the 27 members and we have a 28th, and the purpose is to regulate so that we have all the same definitions of public procurement rules, taxation, etc. Again, it will only take you so far because in theory, it may open doors. In practice, tell this to your local, your national tax authorities. They will say, what? 28th state? We are in our country and we have our rules to follow. So the short answer to this complex question is, we have this wonderful cultural diversity in Europe, and we are all proud of this diversity. Yet, we have to realize it's a serious handicap in this world where digital technologies know no border. And I particularly want to point out the report by Enrico Letta, which really put his finger on what is lacking. We have a not completed single market in Europe, nor a completely unified Europe. We lack a capital market, we lack energy market, etc. And this is part of the reason why we are lagging behind. On the other hand, let me just add one optimistic note. I come from science with my scientific background, and science continues. And we have seen, this little, seemingly little disturbance last year when the Chinese DeepSeek model all of a sudden burst out seemingly from nowhere. And instead of having these very large, expensive, large language models, etc., there was a small Chinese firm subsidized by the Chinese government, etc. But nevertheless, they said, you can do it cheaper, it serves the same function, may not be quite as good, but it will get better. And of course, we are not alone. We are talking about the US and Europe, but there is the so-called rest of the world. And these Chinese little models are gaining rapid access, especially in the rest of the world, because they are accessible, the cost is low, etc. And these developments will go on. So my optimistic note with all these threats that I fully share and your concerns, nevertheless, science continues to make progress, and whatever you do in research, the outcome is uncertain when you begin. It's something that develops as you go along.
So I think one of the most important points you've made there, Helga, is the need for a unified capital market in the European Union, which again is a sort of arcane and rather tedious subject that not many people are interested in. But actually without that, it's very difficult to get the concentration of capital required in order to promote these industries. So Francesca, that sets up you very nicely, because we had a small example, you and I have had a little chat about this, we had a small example last year of Denmark deciding to get rid of Microsoft products and replace them with open source European products for the functioning of government in Denmark. And obviously for Denmark it's particularly sensitive with Greenland and so on and so forth. But that was the argumentation is that actually having Microsoft in the guts of your government administration is a security threat now, given what's happened in the United States. So can you tell us about the Eurostack initiative and what European governments and companies are considering and what the options are there for alternatives to this dependency, this extreme dependency on US-based digital services?
Yes, so first of all, let me say about Denmark. I think that the digital minister of Denmark was very clear about the reason why they did that. And she said something that really, I think it was pretty clear. She said, if you become fully dependent on so few players, then you are not anymore acting freely. So she was saying we have in Europe 80% dependency on the digital services we are using, 80%. So this means that all the infrastructure, all the tools we use, from the cloud to the software, to the digital identity, to the payment system, to the AI models, to the chips, the semiconductors that power everything else, All of this is mainly US technology and a little bit Asian technology. Actually, the semiconductor industry that powers all the technological world, it's mainly based in Taiwan, which is a very heated geopolitical area. So I think that there was a very important reason that at that point Denmark was having the EU presidency, and they wanted to make a symbolic action, but powerful action. And at the same time, if you remember, it happened that Microsoft basically shut down the account of the ICC prosecutor, the International Criminal Court, while she was prosecuting war crimes. And so many people realized that actually a foreign company can shut down the email of a prosecutor prosecuting war crimes because Washington says so. So the lesson was very clear. If you have your data in American infrastructures, the data is not yours. And this is also because we have the US Cloud Act. So under the US Cloud Act, American companies have to hand over the data, being your individual data, but also your hospital data, your school data, your university data, your local administration data, to the US government if this is requested, yes? And then on top of that, of course, Greenland. And I mean, Greenland is a very important geopolitical question, especially at the moment. You saw that yesterday President Trump decided to have 10% tariffs on the 8 European countries that are, of course, moving against the annexation, actually purchasing of Greenland. So I think, and on top of that, of course, there was the Ukrainian situation. I think also we have to realize that Elon Musk, that you talked about before, he's keeping Ukraine internet on. So he can decide, you know, with one decision, this single billionaire, which is actually really very proactive in support of far-right groups and interfered during the European election, he can basically have Ukraine going dark, which this also means data coming from the battlefield in security issues. So, you know, when you have the defense controlled by foreign companies, you have your state administration and your, you know, most precious citizen data, your welfare benefit, the border control, yeah, all the critical things that states are supposed to guarantee in a democracy in the hands of large corporations, which, by the way, are saying very clearly, as it was said before, that they think democracy is an obsolete system to replace. They're just saying that. So I'll get to the alternatives because I do really want to get. I'm sorry, I was like, because I think we need to understand that this is not just about technology. We are giving away sovereignty to actors which have a worldview, and this worldview is authoritarian at the very core, and I think that's what we are trying to basically say. But on the alternatives, I have spent, I mean, I used to be the Chief Technology Officer of the City of Barcelona, maybe some of you know about my work, and 10 years ago, I made a plan for the City of Barcelona that was named Towards Technological Sovereignty. And what we meant was popular democratic sovereignty. So our idea wasn't that just the state needs to control this infrastructure, but that citizens have the right to decide, you know, how their data is used, for what, and how we run the critical systems, the essential services of our life. So I believe that we have a duty to create alternatives if we want to remain a democracy. So you know, leaving Microsoft, I think, is a very important step for critical infrastructure, but also building alternatives. So how many people in this room are using European technologies?
Hands up. Oh,
some people, yeah. And I also know that there are probably the Mastodon developers in the room, which are creating, yeah, a European social network, independent and privacy-preserving. Thank you. So we do have a little bit, but I remember, I mean, during COVID, we all realized that, you know, in order to save life, because there was a public health emergency, our governments had to ask permission to Google and to Apple to please give us the protocol and the application to save life. And you know what? They said, well, yes, but you're going to do it on our own terms.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't that clear enough? And now we are in the middle of this geopolitical situation. So basically, I think we not only have to move away and transition, at least starting from critical services, but we really have to build sovereign technological capability. And that's where the Eurostack comes in. And we can do that, for example, public procurement. I know this is not a very sexy topic, but that's what government do. We spend citizen money to procure services. I mean, 70% of our public budget goes into procurement. Now 90% of European procurement goes to fund our dependency. So we are funding big tech. Now, can we say that by, I don't know, 2030, we get to 50% or 40% funding big tech and 60% funding European alternatives? So we're going to build a secure cloud system, because the cloud is the operating system of the digital economy. We're going to have a EU digital identity system that's privacy preserving. We're going to have a digital euro, by the way, because if you see what's happening with the Fed in the US, maybe there is a problem about monetary stability and independence. Then do we want to train our critical data with AI systems that are aligned with our values and public laws? Yes or no? I think we do. Because the AI is our knowledge as a society. We produce this data. So why don't we train the AI systems according to our laws? So those are all the layers. And by the way, these layers, from critical raw materials to the cloud, to the AI data centers, the AI models, and the applications on top, this is the new diplomacy. This is like the dollar diplomacy once upon a time. Today, we are in the world of the compute diplomacy. So basically, the AI infrastructures and the data centers and the critical minerals that power it is the new power. Yeah? That's why the tech bros, the tech oligarchs, are not just, providers of neutral services. They are they are in a merger with the state. So I would say they're capturing political power. And that's why I think we do have to react if we want, if we understand the power of technology, and we want, with the technological alternatives, to defend democracy. So this is not protectionism, and this is not anti-US. This is pro-democracy. That's why it's so important to basically build these alternatives, I believe.
That's a brilliant intervention, Francesca, and it leads me to a question to Biban about what is the reality. So Biban, I have to explain, is very involved in creating and steering legislation through Parliament, particularly through the House of Lords, the upper house in the UK. What is the reality of the politics of regulation when you say succeed in passing legislation? How is it implemented? Is it implemented?
Well, so I just want to back up and add to something that's just been said.
Absolutely.
Which is, really about, if anyone who has had the misfortune to read the US security strategy, or indeed Google or OpenAI's submission to the to the US security strategy, will see in black and white that there is an intentional economic and technological warfare, that it's actually deliberate. It's not just about imposing the technology that is owned by the US, but it's about undermining our ability to match that technology and to have services and sovereignty of our own. And when I read those things last year, I just found myself thinking, wow, this is 21st century East India Company all over again. We know what that empire looks like, yeah? And we also know how difficult it is to unseat. So I think that the problem that, as I see it, is we introduce regulation, and then the government wants a trade deal, and then the regulation don't upset the Americans. Then the regulator, who's in, somewhat attached to the political realities, goes and does something a bit less than, yeah? And what we see is a gulf between what we anticipated our sovereign right was and what our actual sovereign ability is, because we are bought in. And I think, and to be honest, I agree with everything that everybody has already said. But there's one thing which I think is not quite said. It's not deregulation. It is actually active regulation by means of terms and conditions. It is a replacement of our law. It is an intrusion into our sovereign space. It's not creating a gap in which we can't work. It is creating an alternative reality to which we do work. And I think that the basis of a lot of the arguments that I have literally in the corridors of power are saying we do have the legislation. We do have the power, but it is not being implemented. And I think that that does speak to a need for sovereignty. And when we get to the sort of the infrastructure bit and the stack and so on, then, the whites in the eyes, there's literally a fear in the eyes of government because they cannot see. It is so enormous. They cannot see where to go. And I think that that is something that all of us in our own way and all the people that we work with have to really confront and have to actually identify the choke points. Where in Europe do we have the power to literally decide? Procurement is a very good one and very boring and not a good vote winner. But where do we have the opportunity to actually decide for ourselves? Yeah? But where do we have one or two things that these companies, that are in the stack that are choke points? Points at which we can have something that is required by the other side and therefore be in a negotiating position. I don't think we can go after everything, but I do think that we need to find these choke points. And that goes to Helga's point about we can't find 27 choke points plus UK, that we actually have to find collective choke points about which we agree. So I think it's very difficult for people, anyone in the room who's coming to this for the new time, and we're talking about the stack, and we're talking about procurement, and we're talking about capital markets, and and you kind of go, I just want my social media to be better. I mean, it's a very difficult conversation because sometimes I think the web of everything means that we don't do the things that we could do. And the first piece is to identify the bits that we can do and do them ruthlessly and robustly without this timidity. And I'm afraid it will bring us into conflict with America. But I think we've seen this week, as soon as America wants something new, all of that bending over, all of that appeasement, all of that tech exceptionality, that all the stuff we gave away was for naught. Now we're going to get 10%, 25%, on the trade deal.
I want to move on next to the issue of AI, but before I do, I want to come to you, Marietje, about an issue that Francesca raised. She referred to the whole issue around microchips, around supply chains for critical minerals, and so on and so forth, and pointed out that Taiwan was where the great majority of high-end chips are manufactured, and the United States is able to impose controls on those chips at TSMC, the great manufacturer. But Europe has one company as well, ASML, which is based in Holland, and it is the only company in the world at the moment that can manufacture the machines which makes those high-end chips. And yet it seems to me we have this extraordinary leverage with this one company, a Dutch company, but we never use that leverage. What's the story behind that from your perspective?
Well, this is really a combination of talking to people, reading the newspapers, and a sort of political gut feeling that informs my answer here. But indeed, ASML is a choke point, clearly, and that is both a risk and perhaps an opportunity in the cynical world that we have entered into. I think part of what the professor said about, every country going it alone, and everybody wants the EU to be one, but doing exactly what they're already doing, meaning few governments are willing to make any concessions for the greater good of being, larger, more powerful, and more able as a European Union. And I can only hope that the silver lining of the very challenging times that we're living through is that the EU will integrate further, that it begins to speak the language of power, and that it combines areas of defense, digital, and democracy. Because the good news has been there's been a stepping up of defense spending and strategizing, but it's not combined with the digital single market, for example, or this geopolitical view, because one of the other misdesigns, I guess, of the European Union, for understandable reasons, but it's hurting us now, is that 27 countries have their own interpretation of what national security looks like for withholding foreign direct investment or things like that, while certainly the US and China are considering technology from a strategic perspective, meaning it's integrated between military strategic objectives, economic objectives, and power play globally. And so what I think we've seen from ASML so far and its position in the Netherlands and Europe is that much like what politicians tend to do, they make this too much of a tech issue. So, I've read interviews from the well-respected and incredibly smart founders or former leaders of the company that said things like, we just make very complicated technology. This is true. But we are also a critical European company in a competitive world. And so I think what we all can help is make the discussion about technology very clearly a moral and a political one. Because you don't have to be able to put together an iPhone to know that you don't want your kids to be addicted to the algorithms. The same way that you don't have to be a doctor to make healthcare policy. So what we need to do is to make everybody feel ownership of where this politics is going and not say, this is very complicated technology. So far what the approach with also US pressure, also under Biden, let's be clear, was on a company like ASML, was to talk to the company, talk to the Dutch government, make it a hush-hush small meeting, where, as far as I can see, the coordination between company, Dutch government, and Brussels was just not strategic enough. And I don't know all the details because it's very closely held, there's very little reporting about it. But when you are the trade minister of a country, you go to Washington and you say, we make our own decisions. And 2 weeks later, you do what the United States tells you, you know that something went wrong. And so this is really where we are. And I think that there are many more examples of the way in which we in Europe can be more focused on our strengths. So ASML being one strength, but also, for example, economic and academic and investment ecosystems, we can deepen, we can specialize, instead of all wanting to have a little bit of the same and therefore not, joining forces about the things that really matter, and that can put us all on the map in a stronger way, but by sort of working together where it matters most. And so I hope that that in today's Europe, which has a lot of MAGA sentiments to battle as well, that we can actually muster that strategic vision, that geopolitical combining of strengths of Europe, and that requires political leadership. And so we really need to demystify tech policy for politicians so that they feel equipped to take positions. And then we can have a debate about what position feels best to us, whether we agree with them, who we want to vote for. But right now we see a lot of avoidance, and it means that others, whoever they might be, are making decisions for us and about us, and that's a very bad situation.
Helga, you can do come back on that, and then once you've come back on that, I want you to start the discussion about artificial intelligence and what the developments over the past 4 or 5 years, particularly in the United States, you mentioned DeepSeek as well, and so on. How the whole AI ecosystem that is emerging in the United States has changed the nature of the debate, the nature possibly of the threats, whatever. But
I think one very important, let's say, ideological underpinning of development is, what do we want AI to do for us? It's the human-machine interface, we know this, and there is a clear bifurcation in my view. And the tech brass in Silicon Valley, they are obsessed by what is called the general artificial intelligence. So they want to build an AI that is not just doing everything that humans can do, but can do it much better. And this is why they want this complete control of everything. And it is a kind of hubris, you can say, because there is something called an illusion of control. And when you are in an illusion of control, you don't realize that you are in an illusion. It's only when you hit reality fast and hard that you realize this. But they are obsessed with this. Whether this will come about, there's always a possibility, but in my view, it's far, far away. And then there is an alternative model, which is to develop AI in order to augment human capabilities. And this has enormous implications for the labor market and how many jobs will be lost. Now, economists and historians tell us every new industrial and technological revolution has brought new jobs. True, there will be new jobs. But at the same time, if this insistence on developing only this general artificial intelligence and leaving aside the possibilities, how can we build an AI, that helps low-skilled workers to do better, that does something for the professionals, how to use it instead of just replacing the skills that you have had. Artists and self-employed people know that this is coming now. So instead of saying, it will replace us, how can it help us to become even better? And I think this is one of the bifurcations. And here I see only a one-way street in the American way. The Chinese, by the way, realize this because they are, of course, afraid if there's mass unemployment in China, this is an upheaval that the regime wants to avoid in any case. So that's another motivation, but it's very clear. So this is where we stand. And of course, the question about open source is a very important one because every new technology has to take in the user experience. And the more open source models you have, the more you are exploring all the possibilities. What we know now is very little compared to what we will know 10, 20 years in the future, what we can use AI for. But we need this space to experiment. What can it be useful for? And not to be dictated. And it's even worse. What happens by these AI groups? They try to create the conditions, the economic conditions, the social, the ideological, cultural conditions under which their models are supposed to work and to be applied. And this is where Europe can resist. And I think we have enough in the European DNA, to say, this is not the kind of country, apart, of course, we still value democracy that we have. And we see that democracy in the US is going down the drain from one day to the next. And therefore, I think we have to mobilize this resistance. And to come back, I insist we have to start to think in a European way. And since we are in Austria, permit me to mention just one detail. Austria now, after months of discussion, we have a new industrial strategy, and it was announced 2 days ago. I did not have the time to read it. But yesterday, the minister responsible for the industrial strategy was speaking in the radio, and in the end, he was appealing, first of all, the industrial strategy is about investing in Austria into 9 key technologies. Why we need 9, while Germany has only 7, was not explained. But the point I want to make, at the end, the minister appealed to be patriotic. And patriotic means think in terms of Austria only.
No.
And I think this has to be overcome. If digital sovereignty has any meaning at all in this world, we have to realize, we are squeezed geopolitically in terms of power, everything you said. We have the US and we have China. And where is Europe? In the middle? And, we wake up sometimes feeling threatened, and we need this feeling of being threatened, but at the same time, we have to mobilize and to see where are our strengths, where can we stand up. And it's extremely difficult to realize that the assumptions, and these are decades of assumptions, where we relied on the US as a reliable partner. These assumptions are no longer valid. And I can only repeat, if you read this US national security strategy, it's a slap in the face.
It's of course an official government document.
The language is so blunt, it's so offensive, it is so aggressive against Europe. It's a declaration of war, dressed as a strategic document. Yeah? And people have to read it and realize this is where we are, and this is very hard. Because it means the world that you took for granted can no longer be taken for granted. But we need this kind of wake-up call.
Francesca wants to come in, and then Biban.
Yeah, just random. Yeah, great. No, I have a few points I want to make. In this respect, that Europe is a pound between 2 empires, and we need to find our place in this new world order. I think this is a very important one. And coming back to the choke points and the strategicness of Europe, yes, that's all okay, but let's don't underestimate the infrastructural power of what we are seeing now. And I think this is really key. That's the reason why we wrote a report, which was about the stack. And I know people don't know what the stack is, but I think citizens should know what a tech stack is. And why government's industrial strategy today can't just be about key technologies here and there, because the infrastructural power of the Pax Americana, that's how they call it, the Pax Silica. It's another document you should read, by the way, about the Trump administration. That's the Pax Americana, that's the Pax Romana. This is about controlling of the full stack, critical mineral, energy, AI data centers, chips, AI models, and the applications on top. And China has the same strategy, which is the digital Silk Road. And they have a similar ambition. And by the way, they're having technological self-sufficiency. When we are talking about this AI stack, we are talking about $3 trillion US investment. We also have to be, aware about this. And, the promise of these AI companies, the American economy at this point, the growth of the US economy really relies on these 3 to 5 AI companies that are growing, that are running the economy, yes? Backed by the venture capitalists that maybe we'll have some time to talk about later, like Peter Thiel. So this is the situation. And if you're also concerned about climate change, if you're concerned about energy, renewable energy, about the future of energy, water, land, those infrastructures, I mean, the data about what they consume in terms of water, energy, land usage is incredible. Believe me, I'm also an industrial economist. I have never seen anything like this in the history of the Industrial Revolution. So let's don't underestimate this kind of power, because at the end of the day, when we're signing the trade deal with the US, that's what they tell us. You have to buy 40 billion of AI chips from NVIDIA. You have to buy energy coming from the US. And by the way, they're betting on nuclear energy, not on renewable energy. And you have to buy American weapons. I mean, literally, we signed this. We signed this. So this goes against our own interest. And I wanted to make another point, that is this regulatory attack on Europe. Also, let's don't underestimate that. Because when we have a US administration that says that the former European Commissioner on digital and industrial policy, Thierry Breton, that, by the way, was the person that drafted all the EU regulation, the GDPR, the AI Act, the Digital Market Act, the Digital Service Act. Okay, it's a bit, many different legislations, but at the end of the day, there is an intent to have democratic governance of technology. Well, Marco Rubio defined Thierry Breton as the architect of European censorship. Hello, I mean, he actually, these are laws that passed with 90% of votes in the European Parliament. Those are democratic processes. Yeah, these are about the democracies that we built for many years. And now is the architect of censorship. And then, by the way, in the national security strategy, yes, they say that Europe is is basically on the way to civilizational erosion. Yes? So it's, so I don't want to, so I don't think our intent here is to create this fear. And by the way, if after I have some time to talk about Palantir, I would love to, just to increase the tension. It's like, because I am not sure, and the reason why, I'll come there, but the reason why I also want to a little bit talk about Palantir, because this country has a particular connection with Mr. Thiel, which is your former chancellor. Sorry, I hope this is fine. Yes? Now we get a drone.
This is a free country and an open debate. You can say what you want.
No censorship.
Just to close, and after, please, I want to talk a little bit about Palantir. But I want to say that when we hear, that digital sovereignty, European digital sovereignty, so when we hear this sovereignty washing, so that you are gonna have sovereign cloud, but this is provided by Microsoft. You're gonna have Google sovereign something. You're gonna have the sovereign military by Palantir, sovereign AI by NVIDIA. Please be aware that there must be something here that doesn't quite, like maybe we actually this time, when we talk about European independence and European digital sovereignty, we want to be real. Because the stake is the future of our children, our democracy, our nations. So now we want to go deeper, as we are saying, into these issues.
I think that there's a quite simple formula here. Those things that the United States are bad at making, like automobiles and Scotch whiskey, they impose tariffs on. But when it comes to their exports, particularly in digital services, they see any taxation, any form of tariffs-like regulation as illegitimate. So this is what in the United Kingdom we call cakeism. They want their cake and they want to eat it. Biban.
So I just wanted, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to you talk about Europe and values and also, the way the ASLM got sidelined, outside. And I just want to say, from the UK perspective, we are a cautionary tale. Yeah, we came out of Europe and there was this big idea that we could be independent between, all the geopolitics that goes on. And we're absolutely squashed, yeah? Squashed, yeah? And there's a fight going on currently about trying to stop the government give away our most valuable data set that we own, which is the NHS one, which Palantir and Google and many others are all crowding around. That is the North Sea oil of the next generation. That is the prosperity that the government are desperate to create and are failing to create. And I think that this is something that we have to be really clear that this is also, it's not just a huge transfer of power. And I think all of us have been trying to say, look, it's power, but it's also a huge transfer of wealth, you know, of such an extraordinary level that one of the big VCs, you know, one of the biggest VCs in this, you know, in New York, said to me, you know, there is such a huge bet on AI, and they are so desperate that they will actually have to take whole nation states, not just sectors like the creative sector, but the value of whole nation states into the machine in order to get the kind of return that they have promised and expect. And I think it's the scale that we have to understand. So that's one thing I wanted to say is I beg Europe to find its bottle. I beg Europe to find its way of working together. I beg Europe, because we no longer have that power, and maybe on your coattails we can follow, because actually you are a huge market, and you are 27 nations, and you do have some choke points, and you have a whole load of things that we don't have. And I beg Europe to actually impose those values that you're talking about, and not be too slow for that moment. So I really wanted to say that from a UK perspective. The other thing I just want to say is, you know, is just about some of the things that look like their strengths are maybe also their vulnerabilities. And we have to be both strategic and opportunistic. And I think one of the things, and you talked about job displacement, Helga, is, you know, weirdly, the MAGA voter was against elites, was against the, you know, the distribution of wealth as it now is, was, you know, came out of discontent with the disruption to skilled working class jobs and so on and so forth. And what the tech bros are promising is more of the same, bigger and faster. And there is, and I have noticed it, and I notice it in the conversations I have, in my inbox, and in some of the visible putting head above the parapet, that the MAGA movement is beginning to split on this issue. And I think that that's something that we have to watch, and we have to look for the opportunity in that, yeah? Because weirdly, I don't think that on this issue, Trump himself is an ideologue. He is just surrounded by them and playing a game. I won't go into it, it's been well explained. I think also the concentration power and their own competitiveness is, you know, a vulnerability as well as an obstacle. And I think the third thing that I'm seeing coming out of some of the frontier companies is a big anxiety of their own making, that somehow in 3 years' time they're going to have their Chernobyl. And what are they going to do when that time comes? That is to say, they are absolutely against any form of regulation, any form of curtailment, anything that we may wish to contest in terms of values. But there is an increasing anxiety that they are building something of which they are not in control. And what does that mean? Not only for us, but also for them. And I think these vulnerabilities we must exploit, and we must look at, and we must turn over, just as we must do what we're saying about building an alternative, because actually, you know, to create vulnerability in the other side is economic warfare that we are currently suffering from, but we also have to do it in the other direction. We must understand where their vulnerabilities lie and exploit them.
I'm conscious of the fact that as I knew would happen. Time is running out fairly fast. So I want Maritia and Francesca, I'll start with Maritia. I want to discuss the political and industrial technical strategies of Musk's companies, in particular SpaceX and Starlink associated with it, and Peter Thiel's companies, above all else, Palantir, but Anduril as well.
Yeah.
So can we start with, what are they attempting to do with these companies, Starlink, Palantir, Anduril in particular?
Yeah. Let me also try to build on what's been said, so that hopefully it's, adding to a 360 view for the audience. So indeed, we are looking as Europeans to the US, sort of admiring all the innovation. How can we catch up? How can we prevent missing the boat? And there's indeed discussion about the balance between threats and opportunities of embracing AI, analysis of how many jobs it's going to create and cost and where. But again, we're not looking at it through the lens of power.
Yeah.
So we need to understand that the platform model of AI that is resource intensive from an environmental perspective, but also from a financial perspective, is a gamble. And I think the Americans know it. Yeah. And so they are rushing to roll it out all over the world in unprecedented joint ventures between state and corporations. So you have packages through the Stargate initiative where countries can buy investments in data centers, access to generative AI, and investments in their startup ecosystems. And this is a joint venture between states, investment funds, and tech companies like OpenAI. They say it's rolling out on democratic rails. It's a nice word. But the first client were the United Arab Emirates, so I think that tells you pretty much everything you need to know about those rails. So what is important to understand here is that the stakes of the state and the stakes of the companies in this constellation with the Trump administration are increasingly aligned, and they are trying to reinforce each other. For the companies that you mentioned, Misha, they are a specific niche within this structure because they are military and intelligence technology. Palantir calls itself a data analysis company, but it sits in the heart of government activities, and it's incredibly opaque. So it doesn't reveal much about the contracts, about the data access it has received, but it decides or helps governments decide about very important issues like triage during COVID, like targets of drones in warfare, whether it's Israeli drones killing Palestinians or whether it is Ukrainian drones defending the country from Russian aggression. In any case, the promise is that they have services of an exceptional nature that nobody has. But in fact, of course, they sit very close to critical decisions. And the CEO of Palantir, and I don't want to say everything that Francesca wants to say because there is more to say. But he, interestingly enough, has proactively aligned the company with what he calls Western values. Now, there was a time that my heart really, was beating harder for Western values, but the West has been destroyed by the very government that he is now in service of with Palantir and his company. And we in Europe are failing to accept that reality in actions because even if President Macron, who I greatly admire for his leadership on tech, for taking it seriously and personally, for making France an AI hub, a talent hub from around the world, and seeing the importance of sovereignty well before many other European countries saw it, has now seen his intelligence services signing a new contract with Palantir. So we are not connecting the dots. And if we keep admiring the technology for its capabilities without understanding the power dynamic, if we keep debating how we can balance opportunities and threats in the right way, or how we can mitigate the losses of jobs in one sector or the other, we are not understanding that these platforms are really the infrastructure of our lives. Francesca mentioned it. We have to think about them not as companies that provide innovations like apps or phones or cool things that we can make our lives more efficient with, but that they are platforms of influence that sell infrastructure that takes knowledge, takes intellectual property, and reshuffles it in a way that's unrecognizable. So if we think that generative AI can help us discover new medicine without us understanding that we may lose the intellectual property over all new medicine to these companies, then we're failing to understand what is really at stake here, if you know what I mean. So, what else is there to say about these companies? They are rolling out power.
I can get in.
Yes, Francesca, go.
Francesca,
Take it over.
over to you.
She didn't talk about Elon Musk.
She didn't talk about
I'm
this one,
sorry.
she talked about-
Reasons you want to say about Elon Musk? No, I can add. I mean, Marietje said a lot already. I've been working on a project that's called the authoritarian stack. By the way, please have a look because it's authoritarian stack. .info. And basically, we have been working with some investigative journalists, AI experts, and technology experts to map, because we wanted to do something evidence-based, like data-driven. Because I know that this conversation sometimes maybe, they feel like, oh, they're just making it bigger than what it is. Oh, they are a bit paranoid, yes, about Palantir and the power of this company. So we really wanted to track what's happening in the US administration, in the venture capital that these companies run, and the infrastructure that these companies are building, but also the connection between people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Mark Andreessen, so the core, Silicon Valley oriented ideologues, I would say, like, far-right ideologues, and the Trump administration. And you can see that they are getting government contracts, they're placing people in the administration, and they are proposing a worldview which is that of the new form of authoritarianism. And I think it's important that we understand that, because Peter Thiel says it very clearly: freedom and democracy cannot go together. So when they say they are the architects of censorship, what they mean is we are protecting freedom and we are protecting free speech, but freedom is the illimited freedom of the tech oligarchs, to govern and run these systems for us, for them, for their profit, for their wealth. But then, we are part of these critical systems. So I think it's important we understand that a company like Palantir is controlling border control. So they're doing the ICE. So when you see now what's happening in Minneapolis, the company behind, searching for targets and doing this very, very, with AI tools and very precise, is Palantir. There were lots of Palantir employees in Doge, so they were working on, cutting benefits and cutting Medicare, and they run the NHS, which is the healthcare system in the UK. Then, of course, they're very embedded in the military intelligence. So they are the ones that, for example, in Ukraine, as I was explaining before, they're dealing with intelligence data. So this is the operating system of government itself. That's what I'm trying to say. Those companies now, they are national security companies running the operating systems of government and proposing a worldview that's post-democratic. But the thing is, because, for example, border control, orbital system. So yes, Elon Musk with Starlink and Starshield, which is basically controlling the lower orbit communication. Lower orbit communication usually is only controlled by military and intelligence, and basically they connect embassies, they connect, the most important critical national security agencies. And now we're opening up that to Elon Musk infrastructure. And he's also managing the NATO battlefield intelligence because of Starshield and Starlink. So think about this. We give the NATO intelligence, yes, Elon Musk is managing that, while at the same time is interfering in European elections, running, a kind of like 200,000 people chat with the leader of the AfD, proposing that the AfD should be running Germany. How is this possible? Why is this happening? So I think what we are saying is that we can do something. So please do not go away with the feeling that, oh my God, they are so powerful, they're running everything, what can we do? No, we can do something. Because obviously, what are these contracts that Palantir is at? Who is deciding about these contracts? The politicians that we elect. Why can't we work together with them to understand that if we want to protect our democracy, if we want to protect our critical mission systems, we may want to run it ourselves with the capabilities that are capabilities but in line with our regulations, our laws, because this is protecting, I mean, also the companies, because when you said another Chernobyl, I mean, what is this?
Yeah.
We do not want, I mean, not only for the companies, we do not want another of this like complete crisis of humanity. Yes, we want to prevent this to happen. So I'm just saying, it's not, it's, the power is a lot, the strength is infrastructural, it's political, it's economic, and this is why we are working. I mean, this is why we do the work there, to try to understand what we can do and so on. But at the end, we're not powerless. We do have the collective power, in particular in Europe, to do something about it and to reverse the trend and to say, yes, self-determination.
Francesca, I'm going to intervene there. Simply because, tragically, we're running out of time, but there's still a lot to cover, and I want to go to a slightly different angle. I want to ask Helga. Helga, as you know, last year there was a conversation which was caught. They thought they were off mic, a conversation between Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, in which Vladimir Putin was enthusiastically explaining to Xi Jinping that with all the technological developments going on, important people can extend their life to about 150 now. So that's a great prospect for the Russians. I want to ask you, because I'm trying to understand the motivation of the tech bros and what they really want. You have written about their relationship to immortality and aspirations to immortality. Can you tell us a little bit about that before we start to wind up?
Well, I have been struck by the fact of this, let's say, this new, very masculine, authoritarian culture that developed in the Silicon Valley, including, the quick switch from democratic to becoming, the Trump allies. And I was struck by their belief not only that they have unlimited power, but their power is unlimitable. And that's an important difference. I mean, it's part of the illusion of control, but part of this unlimitable power is connected to their search, and they believe in it, that somehow they can become immortal. People take all kinds of drugs, supplements, blood infusions, etc. So there is this enormous, striving. It's an obsession. We want to live forever, and technology and our power will enable us to do so. And I think it's an illusion because, and I think this is also one point where we can see that this striving for immortality, it just takes off. And it disconnects with the reality in which most of us live. So this disconnect is something that at one point I think will fall back on them. And as you rightly said, we have to look where will be the cracks in this edifice. And, and in the end, and we have seen this in history, look, history of humanity is full of people who thought they were so powerful that their power is unlimitable. Do we remember their names? Some of them, yes. But where are they? In the bin of history.
I'm going to have now a final round before we bring it to an end, which is what I call a quick fire round. and I'm going to go Francesca, Maritia, Helga, and Biban. The question is, in the next 5 years, these aspirations, particularly about Europe and the UK that we've been talking about, are we likely to realize them or to get close to realizing them? Is this something we can do? Francesca. And 2 minutes each, please, because otherwise the people in the theater get very upset.
Well, you know, I'm Italian, so I'm going to go with this Gramsci spirit of pessimism of the will, but optimism of the spirit, yes. So I'm going to say that we have to do it, yes. But I think it's important not to have it, what Maritia said it before, and I align with that. I don't think we should have it just as a tech conversation. Although it is important to acknowledge that technology should be a high priority topic, that we should have debates like this. Thanks for showing up, so many people, on a Sunday morning. But that this is not about technology. This is about European independence. And this is about also deciding if Europe wants to be a real union, which has also not only a market, as Letta is saying, but also has joint political power and intention, and find its way in this new world order, but on a positive side, because we wanna save international law, we want to save a rule-based democratic order and the rights of people and the environment. So when we discuss these topics, yes, I mean, I think we didn't really talk about the important things. For example, jobs, good jobs, like what kind of future we are creating. Are we creating affordable housing? Are we creating better healthcare? Are we creating better cities? Are we creating, like a media environment where we nourish? Are we using artificial intelligence to enhance human capability and collective intelligence? Are we improving democracy? So we're not having these conversations. Why? Because we have to counter, this dystopic world and all the time countering the power. So I think we should be very, we should be very good in analyzing what's happening and have a good diagnosis of where the problems are. But at the end of the day, we want to build a future on our own terms. And I think this is the meaning of independence, and that's Europe's task for the future. So if I don't believe this, I'm dead. So I have to believe we can, and we're going to do it, but we're going to do it together.
Maritia?
Well, yeah. After publishing my book, which is about this outsized power of tech companies and how it hurts democracy, the question of, do we still have a choice? Can we still find a way out? Is probably the question I get most when I do events like this. And it's understandable that when people feel a sense of crisis and concern, that it sort of narrows the imagination, and it narrows creativity, and certainly narrows self-confidence. And I think that that is what's happening right now. And it's also amplified by the lobby that wants us to believe that we no longer have a choice, that our companies will stop function if we change technologies, or if we do not jump on board with the AI platforms that will make us more dependent. So the good news and the bad news at the same time is that there is so much that we have not done. Yeah. That there is a lot of low-hanging fruit, easy things that all of us can do to really change direction, 1. 2, Trump is really helping us understanding why we don't want to be in the situation that we're in. This is not a crisis of Europe's making, it's something we are being confronted with, but I think it creates enormous momentum to boost Europe's competitiveness and innovative capabilities. And whenever I feel a bit gloomy, I think of the Ukrainians. If somebody would have told me 10 years ago, even 5 years ago, that Ukraine would be one of the most innovative, high-tech producers in the world, I would have said, what are you drinking? But under pressure, and it's the worst kind of pressure, they're subject to a war of aggression that is illegal, and it should have been ended a long time ago. But in the conditions that they're in, they have completely changed their skill set. They are producing drones, offensive and defensive, and we will probably all need them. So if Ukraine, under the conditions that they did, have made such leapfrogs forward, then certainly us Europeans, with the smart people we have, with the wealth that we have, can at least stop subsidizing a market that is propping up an administration that is attacking and undermining us. And if we work a little bit harder, then we can use this moment, which is one of challenge, as an extraordinary opportunity. But it does require political leadership to bring all the different stakeholders together to give a sense of direction that we want to stop subsidizing our dependencies, not only by buying, not only by procurement, not only as consumers, but through our pension funds, through our personal investments, through our consumer use. There are so many knobs we can turn. Let's begin.
Helga, next 5 years.
What else to add to what has been said? Well, you know, there is something called a healthy shock. And I think we should be ready to realize a healthy shock. Wake up, know your enemy in this case, understand what is a stack and what needs to be done. And from this follows that you have to stand up. And you have to be courageous and be bold. And Europe has this history of the last century where we had two of the most terrible wars, and we were in the middle of it. And I think this partly is still running in the European memory. I mean, family-wise, this is being transmitted. And we do not want to have this anymore. And what we are seeing in the US now, I think we have enough, you know, resistance built into our history to say this is not the way we want to go. And therefore, we have to muster the courage to stand up and tell our politicians to stand up. And at the same time, as you said rightly, you know, you have to think strategically and opportunistically at the same time and to know when to do what. And you know, it begins at home, but it must go up to the European level. And this is something I can only repeat again and again. You know, every local, national politician thinks of independence and winning in terms of being one of the 27 member states. And this has to stop. We have to start to think European, to act European, and otherwise we stand no chance.
Biban, as you and I know, the opportunities for that happening for the United Kingdom are looking pretty slim. Yeah. You're going back onto the front line of politics of this issue this week, I know. Are you still driven by optimism and a sense that change can happen?
So I just want to violently agree with all of my colleagues and everything they said there. And I think that the battle lines this week are really around the issue that brought me into the whole arena of tech, which is the question of kids. And Britain is now thinking of banning social media for under 16s, like Australia did, and I see that as actually a terrible indictment of the political class that we couldn't make digital world fit for kids instead of banning them. What is the point of saying, you know, everything now is digital and AI, but guess what, guys, you're not invited. So. I think what I want to say is my final thing, because we haven't really talked about the individual quite rightly, because we've been trying to say there is this huge power move that we have to resist, is to just say, you know, I run workshops for children in my spare time, and I speak to kids from all over the world, and they are beginning to say, we don't see our future. We don't see the jobs of the future. We don't see the culture of the future. We don't see how we fit in with the machine that is being promoted. And also, we don't believe in the institutions of state. We don't believe in the politicians. They see us all as bought off and ineffectual. And I think that is the sort of kind of catastrophe for any kind of representational politics. That is the catastrophe. So I agree with my colleagues here. You know, it is not okay to not understand. It is not okay to not fight. It is not okay to give up at this point. And we actually have to do everything, both offensive and defensive, to put this right. And I do think we have the levers of power. And one of our levers of power, not the only one, all the other ones that have been talked about, the structural, the political, but one of our levers of power is in an attention economy. Attention is a weapon. And all of us and all of you have to put our attention and our democratic power and representatives on notice that we will only give our attention and our time to those who are in this fight in the right way for the future of the kids.
Ladies, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll agree with me that our four guests have demonstrated that one thing we don't lack in Europe is the intellectual and policy and industrial firepower required to meet these very, very serious challenges, a challenge which is really on a par with climate change in terms of what it means for the future of not just Europe, but humankind. So I hope that you go away and are able to engage with these messages that we've heard today and spread them further. But until then, will you join me, please, in a riotous round of applause for our four guests, Helga Novotny, Biba Kedran, Francesca Bria, Marita Shaka. Thank you.